Christopher Columbus's own private journals contain a terrifying secret that the academic establishment has spent 500 years trying to bury. When he arrived in the Americas, he wasn't the first. He explicitly recorded native accounts of black traders arriving from the South, carrying weapons made of a mysterious West African metal. What if the key to who really made it to the Americas first wasn't buried in some lost city, but was hidden in plain sight? In the records of Christopher Columbus himself? The story we all learn is that he was met by so-called primitive natives. But accounts stemming from his voyages and from those who followed suggest a very different reality, one that included evidence of black traders who may have come before him. So, why was this idea all but erased from our history books? For centuries, we've been told that black history in the Americas began with the horror of the slave trade. But what if that's a lie of omission? What if the real story involves kings, explorers, and a legacy so powerful the establishment chose to bury it? We all know the rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He lands in the Caribbean, mistakenly calls the people there Indians, and claims a new world for Spain. This moment is taught as the grand opening of the Americas. It's a story of singular European bravery that's been drilled into our heads since we were kids. But that narrative does a lot of heavy lifting. It frames the Americas as a blank slate, just waiting for European civilization to arrive. It conveniently skates past the complex societies that were already thriving there. And crucially, it tends to ignore or dismiss evidence that other Old World civilizations might have already made the trip. The story of Columbus isn't just an oversimplification. Some argue it's an active erasure. It's a foundation built to support a Eurocentric view of history. To question Columbus is to question the very bedrock of that worldview. And maybe the biggest challenge to that story doesn't come from a modern critic, but from accounts related to Columbus himself. During his third voyage to the Americas, Columbus was on the island of Hispaniola when he heard something extraordinary from the local Taíno people. They told him that people had come from the south and southeast to trade. According to summaries of Columbus's logs by figures like Bartolomé de las Casas, these visitors carried spears with tips made of a metal the natives called Guanin. Columbus, always obsessed with gold, got his hands on some of these spear points and sent them back to Spain for analysis. The results were a bombshell. Spanish metallurgists found the spearheads were a gold alloy composed of 18 parts gold, 6 parts silver, and 8 parts copper. Now, this is where the story gets explosive for some historians. Proponents of a pre-Columbian African presence, like scholar Ivan van Sertima, point out that a nearly identical alloy was being produced thousands of miles away in West Africa. And what did some West Africans call their gold-copper-silver alloys? Guanin. For advocates of this theory, the name and the chemical fingerprint being the same wasn't a coincidence. It was hard evidence of transatlantic trade. It was a tangible link between West African artisans and Native Americans long before Columbus set sail. However, mainstream academics are far from convinced. They argue the alloy was known to be produced by indigenous groups in South America and could have easily traveled north through native trade routes. They dismiss the name similarity as a coincidence and point out that no confirmed African artifacts from this period have ever been found in the Americas. Still, the question remains, is it really plausible that two separate cultures developed the exact same alloy recipe and gave it the exact same name by sheer chance? For believers in the theory, the Guanin spears are a smoking gun. So if Africans were in the Americas, how might they have gotten there? The answer could lie with one of the richest and most powerful domains of its time, the Mali Empire of West Africa. The story comes to us from the Egyptian scholar Al-Umari, who chronicled the legendary 1324 pilgrimage to Mecca of the Malian emperor Mansa Musa. While in Cairo, Mansa Musa, whose wealth was so staggering it reportedly destabilized the local economy, told a story about how he got the throne. He explained that his predecessor, often identified as Mansa Abubakari II, had a grander ambition than ruling. He didn't believe the Atlantic Ocean was an endless void. He was convinced you could find what was on the other side. According to Mansa Musa's account, Abubakari II first equipped a fleet of 200 ships and gave them a simple command: do not return until you have reached the other side of the ocean or until you have run out of food and water. After a long time, only one ship returned. The captain told a story of the other ships being swept away by a powerful current, like a river in the middle of the ocean, and disappearing. But Abubakari II wasn't discouraged. He reportedly prepared an even bigger expedition of 2,000 ships. And this time, in the year 1311, the king decided to lead the voyage himself. He gave up his throne and sailed west. He was never heard from again. Mainstream historians rightly classify this account as a legend, as there is no hard archaeological proof to support it. No Malian shipwrecks have ever been found on American shores. But oral history is a cornerstone of West African tradition, and this story has been passed down for centuries. When you combine the legend of the king who sailed west with the physical description of the Canary and North Equatorial currents, a natural conveyor belt that flows from West Africa to the Caribbean, a compelling narrative emerges. For those who believe, the story of Abubakari II isn't a myth, it's the missing piece of the puzzle. The controversial evidence doesn't stop there. In 1513, the Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa was marching across Panama. In his chronicles, the historian Peter Martir d'Anguera wrote that the Spanish were startled to encounter a community of dark-skinned people. Proponents of the theory see this as another eyewitness account of a remnant pre-Columbian African population. Skeptics, however, argue these were likely darker-skinned indigenous groups, and there's no evidence to prove otherwise. Then there's the art. For over a century, some scholars have pointed to the colossal Olmec heads of ancient Mexico as possible evidence. Carved between 1200 and 400 BC, these gigantic stone sculptures have features, full lips, broad noses, that some observers see as strikingly African. While mainstream archaeology and DNA evidence confirm the Olmecs were an indigenous Mesoamerican people, scholars like Ivan van Sertima presented these heads as portraits of African dignitaries who influenced Olmec civilization. So why isn't this information front and center in most history classes? Why is it often relegated to the fringes? Advocates for this hidden history have a simple answer: academic gatekeeping. They argue that accepting this evidence would dismantle the entire discovery myth that underpins colonial history. Acknowledging that African empires might have had the wealth, technology, and ambition to cross the Atlantic before 1492 changes the narrative completely. It reframes African history as one of active agents and explorers, not passive victims. It challenges Columbus's symbolic status. The dismissal of this collection of evidence as pseudo-archaeology is, in their view, a deliberate act to protect a Eurocentric narrative at all costs. This is the kind of history they don't usually teach you in school. But the conversation doesn't have to end here. The story of a possible African presence in the Americas before Columbus is about more than just correcting a date in a textbook. It's about restoring a potential legacy. It's about considering the possibility that the relationship between Africa and the Americas didn't begin in the hold of a slave ship, but with the ambition of kings and the spirit of exploration. The clues are there, hidden in plain sight. In European chronicles, in the composition of artifacts, in the oral traditions of a great empire, and carved into stone. Whether you see it as proof, plausible theory, or compelling myth, the evidence forces us to ask bigger questions. The most important one may no longer be, did it happen? But why were we never even encouraged to ask? The timeline we are taught is a carefully curated lie, designed to keep us blind to the true, hidden history of our world. The academic establishment will bury any evidence that threatens their narrative, whether it's the journals of Columbus or impossible megaliths scattered across the Pacific. If you want to see the impossible magic used to move the 50-ton blocks of Nan Madol and the ancient ocean city they are trying to hide, Click the video on your screen right now. I'll see you there.